So this episode is about the Beatles as usual, and it's the end of 1961. Might be confusing to hear the Clash at the end of 1979, but we're just using that because it's just the theme of the episode, because the episode has to do with London. Just go with it. Welcome to 1961. In fact, it's the very end of 1961. In our next episode, we'll be in 1962, but still, for now, the end of December 1961. Beatle 60 is an unofficial independent study group. We're not paid researchers. We take great care with the history, but, this is not our main jobs. Just so you know. We cover the Beatles story a day at a time, 60 years ago. So 60 years ago, it's the end of 1961. Every day is another day. Is another anniversary of some damn thing. And so we follow their story and the people around them and the world at the time. And it's like a serial drama, like a soap opera almost. The past is the past, and the past happened. The stories we tell about it, we try to be accurate, we try to be confident, but no history is exactly reflecting the past. It's always developing.
I can't understand Teddy saying that at all, really.
Sodom and Gomorrah. This is London, Gov.
They were huge in Liverpool and in Hamburg, but they really wanted to extend their reach as well as to get a real recording contract. London was the ultimate prize. It was where almost all of the big hit music was happening in the UK, and it was certainly where all of the record labels were located.
This is Beatles 60.
Well, hello, dear listeners. I'm Rince Fur, but you can call me Larry. He's Barmy Old Codger, but we call him Andy.
And I'm Mick Jones. Carbon, Silicon, Big Audio Dynamite, and The Clash.
No, you're not!
No, that was just me doing another of my horrible impersonations. I'll work on that one.
Yeah, you better.
We're calling this episode Calling London. Andy, who or what was or were in London in the south of England that the Beatles of the north of England desperately wanted to connect with by the end of 1961? And what does this have to do with Sam Leach and Brian Epstein?
Well, over the last year, at least, the Beatles had begun to feel that they were kind of spinning their wheels. They were huge in Liverpool and in Hamburg, but they really wanted to extend their reach as well as to get a real recording contract. London was the ultimate prize. It was where almost all of the big hit music was happening in the UK, and it was certainly where all of the record labels were located. Brian Epstein was, this early on in his management of the Beatles, already contacting everyone he could in London, all of his contacts from being a significant retailer, which he was, to try to set up meetings and auditions. One audition was in the process of being set up with Decca Records. That would take place in just a few weeks on January 1st, 1962. As for Sam Leach, he was all about live shows, having put on so many huge ones in the Liverpool area. But he knew that what the Beatles needed to do was to expand their live audience to the big city.
We saw in November of 1961 this major breakthrough for rock and roll happening in the area now known as Merseyside County. I'm not sure whether it was all united into one big county 60 years ago, but we need to ask the locals. I thought I read somewhere that it used to be a bunch of smaller counties like Wallasey, Liverpool, Birkenhead, etc. But there in New Brighton on the coast of the Wirral Peninsula, there used to be this fabulous tower, and the Tower Ballroom was connected with its big fancy stage, giant room, great acoustics, Leach's big events, and his booking and promotion of big lineups of beat groups drew large crowds of youth from near and far and wide. How many? A few thousand? It seemed to me, as we're following the story of the Beatles like a serial, like a never-ending rockin' soap opera, that this was an exciting time to be young in this area. But I don't know much about Sam's own story. He seems like a dirty dealer from a business perspective. I just know very little, and I don't want to do his legacy any injustice here. What do we know about him?
Well, they say that those Tower Ballroom shows would have 3,000 or 4,000 people. So Sam Leach was absolutely a very successful promoter. He had started around 1958 putting on shows at Mossway Hall in Croxteth, which is a short couple of miles from West Derby and the Casbah Coffee Club. He continued to book shows there as well as in other Liverpool suburbs. By 1960, he was looking for bigger opportunities. He wanted to put on the biggest shows ever. That was what he was all about, big shows. But his way of doing business definitely rubbed people the wrong way. One thing he would do would be to take over the names of events from other promoters.
Jeez.
Alan Williams would run what he called arts balls, featuring up to 8 bands at St. George's Hall in Liverpool. Suddenly, Leach was putting on his own shows at St. George's Hall using the same label, Arts Balls. Bob Wooler had put on shows at Hambleton Hall in Liverpool under the name Operation Teen Beat. When Leach started putting on shows at the Tower Ballroom, he called them Operation Big Beat.
That's pretty sly. What was his goal in setting up the Aldershot event?
Leach would say that he was trying to help the Beatles reach a live audience in London. But he was also surely interested in expanding his own reach. He apparently booked the venue in Aldershot for as many as 5 straight Saturday nights, starting on December 9th, 1961.
Presumably the last 4 of those weekly shows would have gone okay, but the first one, the one featuring the Beatles, went spectacularly wrong, didn't it?
Oh, that might be putting it a little mildly. It was pretty much a complete fiasco.
So, what all went wrong?
Well, I doubt we have enough time in this podcast to cover all the crazy and often disputed details.
Oh, come on, Andy. Could you try to speed tell us?
Okay, well, let's give it a shot. Sam Leach committed the Beatles to playing on Saturday, December 9th, 1961, and he then started looking for a venue in London with his eyes on the Leighton Baths. It was already booked, so he ended up settling for the Palais Ballroom about 40 miles southwest of London. Leach hired his friend and sometimes driver and bodyguard Terry McCann to put up flyers around Aldershot that advertised a battle between Liverpool and London, with the Beatles representing Liverpool and Ivor Jay and the Jaywalkers representing London. He also ran an ad in the local paper, the Aldershot News. Brian Epstein and Neil Aspinall decided to sit this one out, so Leach had McCann drive the Beatles to Aldershot, leaving the morning of December 9th, 210 miles, no highways, 9 hours on the road. They arrived around 5 or 6 p.m., and no one was there. The show was scheduled to run from 7:30 until 11:30 p.m., so they waited it out. At some point, Leach became aware that the flyers that McCann had put up were nowhere to be seen, and that no ad had appeared in the local paper. When time was running short, and no one, including Ivor Jay and the Jaywalkers, had shown up, Leach started going around to local pubs to get people to come to the show. He ended up with about 18 people. According to McCann, the Beatles played from 7:30 until 9:30, although Paul remembered in 1987 that they played the whole 4 hours. Dick Matthews, a friend of Leach who was a photographer, was there and took several shots that evening. You can easily find on the internet the Beatles playing, people dancing, John dancing with George, Pete singing, John drinking a Watney's Brown Label, and more. When they finished playing, they began to play soccer with bingo balls and finished up all the Watneys. Around 1 a.m., the police came and told them they had to leave. Now, wait a second. Why was no one there? What happened to the flyers in the ad? The common stories about the ad are that either Leach's check bounced or that the newspaper required cash from first-time advertisers and couldn't reach Leach to tell him because he didn't leave any contact information. Bill Malloy, who worked with Dick Matthews, told the Beatles 60 Facebook group that Leach thought he was going to be invoiced. But Sam Leach himself, in an interview with Beatles historian David Bedford, said that he was told by Alan Hope, a member of Screaming Lord Such's band, that their group was playing a show nearby and had torn down all the flyers, called the paper to cancel the ad, and called Ivor Jay and the Jaywalkers to tell them that the show was canceled. As McCann would put it, sabotage. And that's the end of the story. Wait, no it's not. 1 a.m. Going home would be a good idea, right? No. On to London. Sam Leach would say that they went to the All-Nighter Club on Wardour Street in London, and that at some point John and Paul took the stage. But McCann said that they actually went to the Blue Gardenia Club looking for Brian Casser, formerly of Cass and the Casanovas, who are now the Big Three. Casser owned the Blue Gardenia. There, all the Beatles took the stage. So which was it? Well, David Bedford says that the Blue Gardenia and the All-Nighter were the same place. That All-Nighter was the name they used after midnight. But who went on stage? McCann told Bedford that only George played. Anyway, that's about it, right? Of course not. 3 a.m. Time to head home. The van is out of gas. McCann would initially say that he had an emergency £5 note, so crisis averted. But Leach said that they siphoned gas out of other cars. Bill Malloy's comment about how they got the gas was, don't ask. McCann eventually told David Bedford that they knew how to manipulate a pump at a closed gas station to get the petrol flowing, and that it was John that did it. Now they were finally on their way home. They're going home.
Oh my God, they must have been exhausted after that, and it was so fast that I'm not really sure I caught every detail.
Most of it is on my blog, and I am working on updating it with new information that I just discovered this week, much of which I just said really quickly.
So we'll link to that in the show notes, and I'm definitely going to read it. Listeners, if you're searching the web, it's Barmy Beatle Blog.
And the update will be there by the time you're listening to this, called, predictably, Aldershot Update.
So Brian had booked them in Huyton the next day. They must have been so drained from their Aldershot and London adventure.
It would seem so. I have a hard time getting the times to add up with this. If they left London at 3 or even 4 a.m. after getting gas, stealing gas, they would have been back in Liverpool around early afternoon. Plenty of time to get at least some sleep and recover before that evening's show. However, the story is that they returned so late that by the time they got to Hambleton Hall for the December 10th show, there was only time for them to play for 15 minutes. But they got paid in full.
Leach's plan didn't work out well, at least this first week. Next week's it went okay, but too bad for the Beatles. And we see that it messed up their gig at Hambleton Hall that Brian had arranged on the next day. So a disastrous weekend. Was there any positive result from this trek down south?
Well, they do say that Rory Storm and the Hurricanes played the next week and that it was packed. So, yeah, maybe. But as far as the positives from the Beatles trip, there are some great photos by Dick Matthews. They really are very interesting, and you can see a bunch of them on the blog post and on the update. My favorite is John dancing with George, or John drinking a Watney's Brown Label, or Pete singing. I can't decide. And maybe in terms of public relations, Brian was able to make them look good. Because the December 10th Hambleton Hall show was supposed to be their last at that venue. But Brian felt so bad about the fact that they had been paid in full for a 15-minute performance that he arranged for them to play at the hall one more time in January. And this time it was free in order to make up for the mistake.
Well, wait, can I interrupt you? Was it supposed to be their last show, or was it their last show because they screwed them and, came almost 15 minutes before the end,
It's a good question. I don't have any indication that there were shows that were planned that got canceled because of it. I think that maybe it just was a matter of that just no more were planned after that, with the exception of this free show. Think about this. Before Brian Epstein, it's pretty unlikely that the Beatles would have bothered to try to make amends. You know, they were already getting a bad reputation among promoters, as we've talked about before. But Brian was able to make them look like good guys. And he definitely had a knack for that, as you can see, especially between 1962 and 64, with what they looked like going to America. I mean, otherwise, you listeners may not be here listening right now. They look pretty good.
It's a really good point. They were burning bridges all over the place. How did I put it? I wrote a comment about it the other day. You know, there was John's recklessness, Paul's willfulness, right?
Yeah.
George's world weariness, and Pete's loner thing, you know? All of that really didn't add up to good business sense. You know what I mean?
No, it did not. Yeah.
None of those are good business qualities. They all suck. They all suck, actually. You can't do business and be reckless and willful and world weary and all that, you know? World weary is pretty good, I suppose, for a business person, I guess.
Yes, could be.
Privately, you know? But in business terms, he did just the right thing, even knowing that they wouldn't be booking there anymore. Either they didn't have a booking or wouldn't be able to or whatever.
Right.
Even if that was the case, he did the right thing. It's a reputation thing, you know? In various industries, reputation matters. And I think that for rock bands, reputation matters. The Kinks, why were they were banned from America for ages, for years, right? And I have no idea what they did, but...
That I don't know about.
Yeah, we have to look that up.
Yeah.
But that's why the Kinks, you don't associate them much with America until much later, you know? They seem so British of all these groups, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, these kinds of prudent gestures must have been instructive for the Beatles. Like you say, by the time we get to the Mop Tops, they were like civilized or trained or whatever, you know? Especially contrasted with Sam Leach's sort of wild approach as a promoter. Sam and Brian seem to have entirely different business ethics.
Well, Sam Leach may have been very good at putting together impressive live shows in the Liverpool area, but as far as trying to get to London at this point, in December of 1961, Brian was the one who was actually making some progress. Within days of the Aldershot fiasco, Brian had convinced Mike Smith of Decca Records to schedule that audition that we talked about for the Beatles on January 1st, 1962. We'll be talking about that soon.
Here's another sort of offbeat question. How many weeks did he schedule at Aldershot for various group lineups?
It's between 3 and 5. I've read 3 and I've read 5.
So the A&R guys didn't go to see the Beatles. Did they go to see Rory Storm?
No.
So
it doesn't seem like it. We could go into that, too, about how the bad luck that Rory had with A&R people not even wanting to know about him.
I can understand it. Yeah. That's good for a future episode.
Yeah, right.
So here we are at the end of 1961. It's the second half of December. It's the last episode we'll do for 1961. Brian's work still wasn't over for the month, was it?
Not at all. Yeah. The photos that they had been using for promotional purposes were ones that had been taken by Jürgen Vollmer in Hamburg.
Right.
And those photos included Stuart Sutcliffe, who was no longer in the group, and Pete didn't appear in many of them because he hadn't really stuck around for much of that photo session. So Brian thought it's time for new photos. He hired Albert Marion, basically a wedding photographer who had done portraits for Brian in the past and had actually photographed the wedding of Brian's brother Clive. And on Sunday, December 17th, 1961, the Beatles headed over to Marion's Wallasey's studio for a session. Marion, by the way, had a studio close to the Penny Lane roundabout as well. But as it was a Sunday, he didn't want to go too far from his home in Wallasey. Brian told the boys to wear black t-shirts and their leather jackets, so no suits yet. And to bring their instruments. The results of this session included at least one of the most famous early Beatles shots out there. Larry, what can you find about that photo?
Well, so far, Mike McCartney's, Astrid's, Jürgen's, and Dickie's photos are still our most widely viewed images of the early Beatles up to this point. From this Marion session, their first studio photo shoot, they chose this one image that Brian would distribute to the press and record companies, etc. I guess he had a press package or something or other. And some people think the word iconic is overused, but in this case, iconic describes how this image is burned into our synapses and at a split-second glance, for most of us, is immediately recognizable as the Beatles pre-Ringo.
Yep.
The first use of it was on the cover of the next Mersey Beat, which comes out the 4th of January 1962, Beatles' Top Poll.
Mm-hmm.
A few years into the future on our timeline in 1965, the Polydor recordings from Hamburg would be repackaged almost like a bootleg album in America as the Savage Young Beatles.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get to that when we get to it in a few years, but I don't know how all that happened. And that features the image, right? That cover.
Yeah.
Other bootlegs into the 70s featured the 15 Decca commercial test recordings from the first day of 1962, and some of those used the same photos. Then the cover of Anthology 1 in 1995, it's included prominently in the collage by Klaus Forman and Alphonse Kiefer. Even in the present day, we're using the image as our cover photo for this podcast.
Yes.
It's the photo that represents the era we're in 60 years ago today. I want to mention also that Manchester historian Steve Bradley posted an image of the location of Marion's shop in Wallasey Village.
That's right.
And it's now a takeaway pizza place.
Doesn't that figure?
And he will be on our podcast soon.
Next month, yeah. Right. Yeah, this photo, it's an amazing thing. You've told me also that you think about the connection between this photo session and the Decca audition. What is up with that?
Well, again, bootlegs of the 15 Decca tracks years later featured the Marion photo. But beyond that, well, what I think about the past and what actually happened could be widely at variance for all I know. I want to be careful in developing historical narratives. Even at our hobbyist level, we need to be comfortable not knowing details. So I have to say I don't really know. By the way, that's sage advice to fellow scholars. Resist the temptation to appear a know-it-all.
Yes.
Knowing nothing is almost worth more in historical research. In this case, I don't really know the details and wouldn't want to put misleading assumptions out there. But Brian arranged both the photo shoot and the audition around the same time. You've explained that Marion had two studios. They shot at the one in Wallasey Village because his Penny Lane studio was closed the day they wanted to book. Obviously, 3 of the Beatles would have found Penny Lane way more convenient, but they chose to go all the way over to under the tunnel to Wallasey. Because they needed the pics as soon as possible, I guess. Why the rush? Why was that particular Sunday so important?
I think it may have been a combination of things that caused them to maybe take the ferry across the Mersey.
So ferry across the Mersey, of this land's the place I love, and here I will stay.
Can I talk to you about Brian Epstein?
Oh, certainly, yes.
What's he mean to you as
Brian?
your manager?
Oh, money? No, serious though. He's done a lot for us, you know. He tells all kinds what to do, and made us wear suits and everything. Yeah, looked about it.
All right. And this is basically just conjecture, but Brian did like to get things done quickly. Just think about all of the contacts he had made in less than a full month of being the Beatles manager. Already an audition set up with a major label, Decca, and that could very much have something to do with getting the photos done quickly. It was very important to have a well-done professional promotional package ready to submit to the high and mighty Dick Rowe at Decca Records. Those old photos that didn't even portray the correct lineup of the group weren't going to cut it. They had 2 weeks to rectify that situation, and Brian did ask Albert Marion for a rush job developing that film.
My question is this. How do we know whether they took the ferry or the tunnel?
That's going to take a little bit more research, I think, on my part.
I think we have to get Torsten. Torsten Knupflauch can study that and get back to us.
Would he know that?
I don't know, but he's good at sleuthing these things.
When did the tunnel go in?
Well, aren't there 2 or 3 tunnels now? I think there's 2, right?
There must be.
Yeah, it started with 1. I don't know the names of them. You know, if we were talking about the Boston scene, I would know the Samna Tunnel and all that, but I don't know the tunnels in Liverpool.
Right.
We'll have to wiki that. There must be a Wikipedia thing for the tunnels of Merseyside.
There's gotta be.
There are many ways to get our podcast every 2 weeks. Just search Google, put Beatles 60, that's Beatles 60 in quotation marks, along with the word podcast. Also, Andy Sped spoke the entire Sam Leach fiasco story at Aldershot near London, 31 miles southwest of London.
And you're going to edit that to make it even faster, right? Yeah.
Yes, I can change the tempo without changing the pitch.
That's right.
So make it sound like even more like Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah.
Rubber biscuit. But for this, go to the Barmy Beatle blog. It should be up by then. I guess the update should be up by the time this podcast drops.
Yeah, it'll be up.
And we will provide a link to it in the show notes.
Right. Well, then what else is there to say besides happy holidays to everyone? Whichever ones you celebrate or may have already celebrated, hope you have and had a great time.
Wishing all a safe and happy holiday season. We'll be back in the new year in 1962.
We will.
See you then.
Bye.